On your computer controlled system, you'll have your user's manual. And these pieces are a little bit tight in the foam, just gotta get them out. You'll have your hardware parts box. And this piece is called the motor box because there's actually motors inside of it. You'll have your black motor box. In our parts box, there's several different parts that are obviously needed to install your robotic piece. You have your cable bag, pulley cover, carriage bracket, wire management, X-belt brackets, your X-belt, your idler pulley, as well as some spare hardware. We're going to mount the motor box to our motor box bracket. This bracket comes pre-installed on your carriage. If this bracket's at the back of your carriage, then naturally you need to remove the carriage, turn it around, and place the bracket so it's on the front of the carriage. We'll then take our motor box, put it down underneath. You'll notice that on the motor box there's two mounting holes. On the motor box, those two holes line up with the two holes that are in your motor bracket. Just position your screw into each mounting hole. Because of our belt attachment, we don't want to tighten our screws all the way down just yet. Once we mount the rest of our pieces, then we'll tighten our motor box all the way down. After we've installed our motor box on the front of the carriage, we'll then come to the back of our carriage, same location as our rear encoder. Using our idler plate, comes pre-assembled, we're going to install it onto these two rear holes. You'll notice there's 4 holes. We're going to install it on the 2 inner holes on the back of the carriage. Remove both the screws. Place the bracket on top of the 2. You'll notice that there's slots in the top of your bracket. The reason for that is we can use that to tighten the belt that's going to go around this in just a second. We're going to take the nut plate. We're then going to place the nut plate underneath the carriage, and we're going to reinstall. Like the motor box on the front, you don't want to tighten this one all the way down just yet because you will be adjusting it for your belt in just a second. We're going to remove this current bracket that's on the assembly. You'll have to use a wrench on the bottom side and an Allen wrench on the top, and just loosen those bolts. We're then going to take our carriage bracket and we're going to attach our carriage bracket to these 2 holes. Okay, to connect your belt, we need to first assemble our belt clamps. To do that, you'll notice that one of the holes is actually larger and one of the holes is actually smaller. So what we do is we take one larger hole and line it up with one of the smaller holes. So as I flip this over, I'll take my smaller hole. So again, look at the holes when you look from the back side. One's smaller, one's larger. As I turn it over, I've got a larger hole lined up with a smaller hole. So therefore, when I assemble, I can place my screw through. I don't want to tighten it all the way down, just a couple turns, and then I'll flip the bracket over, place it through the larger hole, screw it into the smaller hole. So now you can see that my clamp is actually attached. I'm able to open it up and I can slide it around my belt. Once you have your belt clamps attached or connected, we're going to take our carriage bracket and our black belt. Notice that one side of the black belt is smooth, another side has teeth. Holding the bracket like so, we're going to take the teeth facing down towards the tabletop, insert it through the hole like so. So we'll take a belt clamp, slide it onto your belt firstly. Again, with the teeth facing down, I'm going to slide my belt through the mounting hole, and let's flip this over. When I flip it over, you'll see that I have about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of tail hanging over on that belt. So with that, I will then take the belt clamp, slide it on, and I can tighten the belt clamp down. And I want the belt clamp fairly close to my bracket. It's not extremely important that my belt clamp is exactly tight. The most important piece is that I have the teeth of the belt. The teeth of the belt actually intersect each other. That's what's actually clamping the belt down. So you can see I have a little bit of a gap right there in the belt clamp. That little bit of a gap is okay, because again, it is clamping down on the belt. Now we'll install the other side. Okay, then we're going to install the other side of the belt. Same as the previous side, with the teeth facing towards the bracket. Loop it around, slide your belt clamp back over the belt itself, and then we're going to tighten it down. Now this one, don't tighten it down all the way. Once we have it installed onto our carriage, we're going to have to feed through the excess belt and clip it off. So I have it snug, but I don't have it extremely tight. Having your carriage bracket installed with the black belt, we can then take this, called the nut plate, remove the 2 screws from the nut plate. The nut plate goes on top. You can see there's 2 pre-drilled holes in your carriage. The nut plate goes on top and lines up with those 2 pre-drilled holes. And then we can place a screw through each one of the holes and screw onto the nut plate. You can then take your carriage bracket, feed your belt down through the center of your carriage, because we're going to have to loop it around the motor box we previously installed, as well as the idler bracket we previously installed. With this nut bracket you have right here, you'll take your carriage bracket, like so, positioned so the foot is facing down, and you'll place it between the nut plate and your frame. So it slides right in between right there, and then make sure you tighten it down. Taking your black belt you just installed, I'm going to feed it through, and you notice right here that I'm feeding my fingers under. I want to make sure that belt stays nice and straight, doesn't twist as I'm pulling it off. Having my teeth facing in towards my pulley. So again, the teeth are right here, the teeth facing in around the pulley. I loop it around the pulley, and notice this pulley's still loose. Don't tighten it yet. I'm going to tighten it at a later time once I have my belt fully installed, and we can tighten that bracket down to give us a good tension. So now we're going to go to the front, and we're going to loop our black belt around our motor box. Okay, we're then going to loop our black belt all the way forward again with the teeth facing in, and what I did is I ensured that my belt didn't twist as I was bringing it forward. I then loop it around my pulley, but you'll notice how much length I have left over. Remember that we didn't tighten that belt clamp down all the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to reach under, we're going to grab onto the belt, and we're actually going to pull the belt in. We're going to take in that slack off that belt, making sure that everything's nice and straight. Now I don't need to have a good tension on the belt right now. I just need it to be as close as I can get it. And then we're going to cut off the belt, and that's where we use our rear idler to take up that slack to give us a good top belt. So taking up the tension on our black belt, this is my leftover tail, and you can see how long it is. I have my belt clamp on already, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it just a little bit, just to give me a good tension, and then I'm going to tighten down on the belt bracket. Once we have both of our black belt clamps tightened, we can then, remember we left this one loose, we can then tighten our idler bracket there on the backhand side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to brace my fingers here on the back, and I'm just going to give it a good tension. I'm going to pull it back so you can see how that bracket moves and brings in the black belt tension. And then just tighten down each individual screw. It is not important that your black belt is like a piano string type tight. You should just have a good taut belt. I still move just a little bit, but it's not like a piano string, but it's not floppy. It doesn't just flop there, it has a good tension to it. With these systems, you notice that we had our machine attached the whole time or sitting on the top carriage. You do not have to have your machine on the top carriage while you're installing this piece. To make it a little bit easier, you may think about removing your machine, installing the black belt, and then replacing your machine back on. Okay, we're back at the front with our motor box. Remember that we left these two screws loose, confirming that we have a good black belt tension. We're going to tighten each of these screws back down. When doing free motion, you will feel the drag of the belt slightly on your system. If you feel that the drag is too much for doing free motion, you can disengage your lever by loosening these two screws. Don't take them all the way out, just a couple turns to loosen them. And you can see your bracket slides out, and you want to flop it all the way over to the side. And what it will do is it'll dangle inside there. As I move forward and back, you can see it doesn't hit anything, it doesn't drag on anything, but it gives me a nice free system front to back. We're now going to attach our white belt the length of our frame. We also call this the X belt because it's in the X direction. To do that, we need to remove this screw if you have this screw installed on your frame. Specifically, what we're doing is this hole right here lines up. There's a motor on the back of my motor box. This screw right here lines up with the pulley that's on the backhand side of my motor box. So I'm going to remove this screw.
Hi, this is Laura. Thank you for holding. Can I help you?
And I'm going to install the included eye bolt. This nut right here, once I have my eye bolt installed, I'm going to twist the nut, and I want to grab a wrench and make sure I tighten that down nice and tight. That prevents my eye bolt from twisting once the eye bolt's been installed. Once you have your bolt tightened here on this side, you want to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. Removing the bolt, installing your eye bolt, and tightening down the nut. Again, making sure that the eye of your eye bolt is facing up, because we're going to be installing a belt through this piece. In your white belt assembly, you have your white belt, your belt clamps, just like on the black belt, but also in there you have two eye bolts. Because we pre-installed the eye bolts onto our carriage, these eye bolts are unused, and you can just set them aside. You won't use them for this installation. To attach your white belt, we need to do the same thing we did on the black belt. We need to pre-install our belt clamps, and just like before, we're going to take our larger hole and our smaller hole, line them up together, and then install the screw. Open up your white belt. And what we're going to do with our white belt is we're going to extend it the length of our frame all the way down, attaching to those two previously installed eye bolts. So on your previously installed eye bolt, we'll take our white belt. Just like on the black belt, there's one smooth side and there's one toothed side. I'll take my pre-installed belt clamp, slide the belt clamp onto the belt, then I'll feed my belt through the eye of the eye bolt. Like the black belt, I just want about a ½ inch to an inch long tail, and then I can install my belt clamp. Looping it around, you have about a ½ inch to an inch long tail, and then you can slide on your belt clamp. I want to slide my belt clamp fairly close to the eye of the eye bolt, and then I can tighten it down. This one, you can just turn the eye of the eye bolt, tighten down the other side, and then you can retighten your nut, or you can reach from the underside and tighten that screw. So taking your pre-installed white belt, notice I'm feeding it through and I'm making sure my belt doesn't twist, and I'm going to extend the belt underneath my carriage. I'm going to go over this top rail all the way down to the other end of my frame. And again, I'm feeding my fingers down to make sure I don't twist. I can then take my belt bracket just like before, feed the bracket on, and install through my eye bolt. So once you have your white belt fed through your eye bolt, notice that this one has quite a long tail. So I'll feed it all the way down. I can then slide my belt clamp onto this end of the belt, sliding it all the way back up. Now this is a personal preference. Either you can leave your extra belt dangling here, or using some scissors or some snips, you can cut your belt off. Just like the other side, we'll tighten down our 2 screws. And like our other belt, we want to just make sure it's a taut belt, that it's not sagging, but it's not like a piano string. In just a second, we're going to talk about how it gets tensioned on the black motor box and how it takes up that slack to make sure it's nice and taut. This is your lever on your motor box that engages or disengages your white belt. When the lever's on the right-hand side, it's in the engage position. To disengage, you'll notice there's 2 levers right here. This lever right here, the smaller, thinner lever, is actually my locking lever. So to disengage, I actually flip that lever out of the way, and then my large lever can slide over. When I'm on the left-hand side, that's disengaged. When I'm on the right-hand side, you'll see that the small lever clicks into place, and that's the engage position. So just moving the small lever out of the way and sliding over gives me a disengaged belt. We now need to feed our white belt through the cogged pulley on the backhand side. To do that, I want to position my belt in between these pulleys. You see how I kind of forced it in there a little bit? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my carriage just a little bit to feed it down inside that toothed pulley. So you see how I move the carriage just a little bit and the white belt feeds down inside, and now it's in the pulley engagement. I'm not actually in the engaged position, it's just in between the pulleys in the proper position. On the motor box, as we discussed previously, this is your engaging and disengaging lever for your left to right movement. So right now I'm in the engaged position with my white belt attached. It is quite difficult to get this disengaged. So what I prefer to do is, utilizing my fingers here on the side of the box, I'll actually engage it just a little bit farther, disengage the lever, and you saw that I used my index finger to do that, and now my lever moves all the way over to the side to be in the disengaged position. As I go to engage my lever, right here it gets quite tight. And the reason for that is I've got my white belt a little bit too tight on my system. So what we need to do is we need to disengage one of our belt clamps, take out a couple teeth of our belt, just so when I come out here, it should be taut. It should be a little bit tight, but this is very difficult for me to engage it. Very difficult for me to press that way. It shouldn't be that tight. So I'm just going to take out 1 or 2 teeth of the belt to give me a little less tension on the belt. With the cable run from the motor box, we're going to plug the other end of the cable into the robotic port, and it just clips right in. Our stitching cable will plug into the, you can see there's a label on the side, stitcher box port, and you can hear it clip in. Taking your power cable, you're going to come down through the carriage like this, and you're going to come around and plug it in to the power port on the side of your motor box. You do want your cable to feed around like this, and again go under the carriage because you don't want it to impede your forward movement. And then you're going to feed it to the back of your carriage with the stitching cable you previously installed. For your wires, you received several zip tie mounts. These have a sticky back on them. Just peel off the backing of the sticky back, and you can mount the mount to the side of your carriage to help guide your cables in the proper direction so they don't impede your movement or get in the way. On this mount, I place it just about level with the motor box, just about right there. It's not extremely important exactly where the mount gets placed. It's just important that you're able to tie the cables in a good location so it doesn't get in the way of your movement. Once you have your anchor installed, you can mount your wires using a zip tie, but notice this wire right here is not pulled extremely tight on that assembly. So as I feed my zip tie up through, I'm going to tighten it down. I want to make sure that that wire isn't pulled on extremely tight, that it has a nice service loop as I tighten it down. I can then take my scissors or my snips and snip off the zip tie. Okay, we can then install one of our mounts to the back of our carriage. Again, it's not extremely important exactly where on the back. I like to place it about maybe 2 inches from the back end. It just gives me a good mounting location for my 2 wires to be mounted here on the back. I'll pull my wires fairly tight as I come back and install my zip tie. The most important thing is when installing this is that your stitching cable has a good service loop here on the backhand side. So when your machine travels back, the machine doesn't run over the cable, and it has good travel for your stitching cable coming forward and backwards. To power on my motor box, you can see the power switch right here. I flip it to the up position, my motor box powers on, and then around here on the front, I actually have a light that starts to blink. It blinks on, off constantly. Good. Here's the light on front of the motor box blinking. This light right here means the program is actually running on the motor box. If you don't have the light blinking, then we need to figure out why it is not. When our motor box is first powered on, this screen came up on my display, and what it's saying is your robot firmware is out of date. That's okay, even though our robot system is brand new, this display is in charge and says it has a newer version for it. To run the update, we just press the check mark, and it will run the update on my motor box. Once the update's completed, you can see my robot icon here, which was previously grayed out, is now selectable. You can see that when I select the robot icon, notice the numbers down here in the lower right corner, that as I move my system, see how those numbers change? That's an extremely important piece, that if those numbers are changing, that means that my machine and my display is communicating with the robotic piece properly. In the lower left corner of your screen, you have an I button, your info button. I can press the info button, and I can press any icon on the screen to get a description of what that actually is. This gives me a description of what that button does, but you'll notice the film reel that's just below it. I can press the film reel and it'll actually open up a video explaining to me how that function actually works, when, where, and why I would actually use that function. If I play the video, you'll notice down here I still have my icons, my Android icons in the bottom left corner. I can tap the screen and I can press the back arrow to go back to my previous user interface if I didn't want to watch the video all the way through. When your system's fully attached, we need to confirm that all of the belts are reading properly. To do that, once you come over to this screen, you set the back left corner just anywhere you want to. Set the back left corner, and you'll notice that these two numbers zero out. X is 0 and Y is 0. As I pull my machine forward, I should get a positive number for my Y, and as I push the machine to the right, I should get a positive number for the X. So naturally, just the opposite of that, as I pull the machine to the left, I should get a negative number on my X, and as I push my machine back, I should get a negative number on my Y. That is proper. Forward is positive, and to the right is positive. As you pull the machine forward, if you're getting a negative number on your Y axis, that means that your black belt is on in reverse or flipped over. If you're getting a negative number as you push the machine to the right, that means that your white belt is on reverse or upside down as well.